Whether we like it or not, drugs are everywhere.
People who use drugs are just like everybody else. It's a broad cross-section of society, rich people, poor people, everybody.
Cocaine, MDMA, methamphetamine, LSD and marijuana.
It was the biggest cocaine bust in our history.
Wastewater drug testing has revealed methamphetamine use has risen by a third.
But lurking beneath the big names are their lesser-known synthetic cousins. Powders, liquids and pills conceived in legitimate labs and hijacked by rogue chemists who change their formulas to stay ahead of the law.
All these rogue chemists have to do is slightly alter the molecule, and then pow, you've got a new drug.
Designed to mimic the effects of traditional drugs and sold as them too. It's a formula that's blurred the line between medicinal, mind-blowing and malicious.
The current illicit drug supply is far more dangerous than we've ever seen.
And in the wrong hands, with the wrong dose, they can be lethal.
He was standing talking, and then the surge of drug hit him, and he just passed out straight away.
You're playing Russian roulette anytime you're taking these products.
One of them is fentanyl, a helpful painkiller in our hospitals and an unhelpful killer on the streets.
Let's go! Come on!
Preliminary data from 2021 show that 72,000 Americans died of an overdose involving fentanyl.
50 times stronger than heroin. It's a synthetic opioid so potent that a dose the size of 2 grains of rice can be fatal.
It is extraordinary that nobody died during that Wairarapa incident.
If it's tablet form and it's fentanyl, it's a kill pill with fentanyl.
And it's triggered the biggest drug epidemic that America has ever seen.
The opioid overdose crisis.
The numbers only continue to skyrocket.
12,000 fentanyl pills last week inside sweet tarts.
It's an epidemic that's spreading internationally.
And if it hits here, it get real ugly. Yeah, real ugly.
It was here in Wairarapa in June when 12 people overdosed on a white powder they thought was cocaine. What they'd actually taken was fentanyl. So how did the lethal opioid make its way through our borders and into regional New Zealand? Over the picturesque Rimutaka Hills are the sleepy towns of Wairarapa. They're best known for their rural farmland, wine and quaint little townships. But on Matariki weekend in June, the quiet region made headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Racing to find the source of the deadly drug fentanyl.
Police have now confirmed it was the potent opioid fentanyl.
Wellington Free Ambulance Medical Director Andy Swain says it all started with a 111 call at 1:40 p.m. on Matariki Friday.
There was a standard call out to a patient who had collapsed, but on arrival there was a rather disconcerting situation in which somebody else who was standing up also suddenly collapsed to the ground. It was very stressful, as you can imagine. It's the type of situation that you might encounter, for example, in exposure to a noxious substance or chemical, where people are overcome by that particular chemical, and then one by one they collapse or they're affected.
Just under 2 hours later, at 3:22 p.m, 2 more calls were made to paramedics, who found even more patients with overdose symptoms.
In each case, they really managed to catch each patient before they deteriorated to a critical level. I mean, the patients lost consciousness and they started to stop breathing and they were treated for that, but they didn't actually go as far as progressing into cardiac arrest.
Then at 5:21 p.m, another 111 call.
The nature of the drug was not immediately directly relevant. Once it came to light, then it was appreciated that we do have an antidote for that medication, and so that was commenced. But the antidote itself is quite short-lived, and you need repeated doses. and this was a challenge because the ambulances only carry so much.
Later that night, 2 more emergency calls at 10:28 and 10:29 p.m.
One patient was described to me as collapsing from a standing position. He was standing talking, and then the surge of drug hit him, and he just passed out straight away on the floor. It was fortunate that everybody survived.
Finally, the next day on Saturday, another call out in Carterton. In total, 12 people were hospitalised during Matariki weekend in Wairarapa. But a week later, a 22-year-old man became the 13th overdose in the region. It was a shock to the community, authorities, and paramedics.
I mean, they're used to dealing with emergencies, and sometimes there are multiple casualties, like in a multiple vehicle road crash, and they know what to expect, but when they were called to this, and what they encountered was not what they expected.
It wasn't what the patients expected either. What they expected was cocaine, and what they got was something much more deadly. A white powdered cocaine look-alike authorities say was made up of bulking agents and about 23% fentanyl. A dose any higher could easily have been fatal. And for one Kiwi woman in the US, it was.
Hi, my name is Carolina Lewis.
She was a fantastic person. Had a lot to offer, had a whole life ahead of her. She was actually studying, had a degree in journalism, and that's where her interest was. She spoke several languages. She had a life ahead of her that was cut short.
Carolina Lewis was just 23, a talented tennis player on a college scholarship in the US. She'd recently graduated and was about to get her first job. She was kind, she was beautiful, and she was bubbly. Then one night in September 2019, it all changed. And her father, David Lewis, received a call no parent should.
And I had the number there and I was like, I didn't really know. I thought this is odd. I actually threw the number into Google and managed to find out the number, like it was a deputy coroner from the county where we were in the States. And then I finally managed to pick up and call that number, and there wasn't the person that I had. They said, listen, I'll get them to call you. And they passed them over. Sure enough, I got a phone call a couple of minutes later. They said it's whoever it was, the deputy coroner. I said, it's about Carolina, isn't it? And she's dead. And he said, I'm sorry to inform you, your daughter is dead. A week later, after hugging her and seeing her, and then the next minute we saw her dead on a bench. And that is not something pleasant to keep inside.
David and his wife last saw Carolina in New York just before she travelled to Washington, DC. Like any 23-year-old, she went dancing with her friends, but was seen on CCTV leaving a club with a masked man. She frantically texted another man named Glenn Gibson to come and get her. Carolina told him she'd taken an OxyContin pill before going with him to a hotel. She fell asleep and she never woke up.
There was no oxy in the system once the toxicology report came out. There was fentanyl. They say that if it's tablet form and it's fentanyl, it's like it's the kill pill with fentanyl, so it was completely fake. And yet she was also taking it while she, under distress, scared, panicking, which she was writing in text messages.
So she's taken something, whether or not it was willing or under distress. She took one thing thinking it was something,
yes,
when it was something
exactly.
else. People would say that she technically overdosed. What would you call it?
If someone gives you an ice cream or something to eat and it's got cyanide in it, or fentanyl for that matter, and you just need a sprinkle of fentanyl equivalent to a grain of salt or whatever it is, and they'll poison you to death. They've murdered you. So, in my opinion, and like many others, she was poisoned, she was murdered.
A murder David Lewis says he's still fighting with US police about. He says there's so many unanswered questions and even more pain.
It's going good.
Destroyed us, completely destroyed us. We were a tight unit, and Carolina was like any child, special, and its existence now, survival, until the day we join her.
Will there ever be a normal now, or back? No.
It's normal. Christmas is coming up. Do you think I want to celebrate Christmas? Christmas is for family. Our families. Carolina's not here. We sit at the dinner table and there's one chair missing. It's Carolina's chair.
Fentanyl-laced powder, like we saw in Wairarapa, and fake pills, or so-called kill pills, are irregular in the States. It's part of a synthetic opioid problem that's been dubbed the most deadly crisis in American history.
Come on, come back. Come on, brother.
In the United States, rates of fentanyl overdose death have been increasing really precipitously since about 2013. In 2013, there were around 3,000 overdose deaths from fentanyl, and preliminary data from 2021 show that 72,000 Americans died of an overdose involving fentanyl.
While some consciously take fentanyl, Dr. Emily Einstein from the National Institute of Drug Abuse in the US says many others think they're actually taking heroin, cocaine, meth, or even prescription pills. Fentanyl pressed into counterfeit pain and anxiety medication and sold as Adderall, Xanax, or oxycodone.
So in 2018 in the US, around 300,000 pills were seized that contained fentanyl. And as of 2021, that number approaches 10 million. It's now also found in cocaine and methamphetamine in the US. So this is increasing overdose risk for people without an opioid addiction. And then as these counterfeit pills enter the drug supply, we're now seeing a very startling increase in overdose deaths among people aged 14 to 18. So these people might order what they think is a Xanax on Snapchat. They'll receive a counterfeit pill, it has fentanyl in it, and people can overdose and die just from one drug encounter.
It's a dangerous game of drug roulette, because more often than not, one pill isn't like the other.
So the same batch of counterfeit pills might have a pill that has a fairly mild effect, but then the next pill could have a lethal dose of fentanyl. So if two friends, say, get counterfeit pills from the same batch, one might be fine and one might experience an overdose event. They slow down breathing, so a person would slump over, pass out, become non-responsive, their lips might turn blue, but the respiratory rate is the key factor that causes the danger to overdose death.
Is it more dangerous than ever, do you think, in this day and age to use drugs, given that most people really don't know what's in them?
Exactly, yes. I think it's absolutely true that the current illicit drug supply is far more dangerous than we've ever seen.
New Zealand police have been closely watching the tsunami of deaths in the US.
What I suppose we're seeing here is that the cartels and other organised crime groups are adding fentanyl in or mixing it in with, say, heroin, cocaine, prescription medicines, simply down to the basic fact that they're going to make a lot more money by doing that. It's far cheaper. They can sell it in smaller amounts. They don't care about the outcome. And our fear is that we're going to see it being mixed with a raft of drugs, and come down here into New Zealand.
And like the United States, Detective Superintendent Greg Williams from our National Organised Crime Group says a big fear is the variable doses of the deadly drug.
A lot of the gangs, organised crime groups, were using NutriBullets to mix the fentanyl. So the small amount of fentanyl goes in with a cutting agent. They mix it up in the NutriBullet, and everyone would think, well, that's naturally, it's spread perfectly through that, through the product. But actually, the research showed that it didn't. So you get clumps of fentanyl, areas with no fentanyl, areas with just the right fentanyl. I know full well that the people involved in the international drug trade have no conscience whatsoever. So if they think they can make a buck, they'll do it.
And they'll do it with whatever substance provides some kind of chemical punch. But while cartels are the ones cutting other drugs with fentanyl, producers in China are the ones creating it. Much of it then sold to individuals on the dark web or bought and mixed by drug traffickers in places like Mexico and Canada.
I don't think you necessarily can rule out the United States. We have seen an increase in drugs out of the United States, through the cartels. And that all comes down again to price. The prices here are high. For here, Australia, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, we pay some of the highest retail prices in the world. So that increased attention by the cartels here creates an increased risk that eventually it will come as it did in Wairarapa. It'll arrive down here. I think this recent example is, the sort of scenario that we're all fearing. In this case, this was, I think, about an ounce of what the person believed was cocaine, imported into New Zealand on the dark web, and then sold, unwittingly to users in the Wairarapa community who believed they were getting cocaine.
That was just the second time fentanyl has ever been found illicitly on our shores. Our police believe it was the exception to the rule, at least for now.
Can I say categorically it isn't here? No, but I think that is a bit of an aberration, which is kind of a good thing, and is a great warning to people here in New Zealand about just how dangerous it is.
And like we saw in Wairarapa, dangerously easy to get on the dark web. An anonymous collection of websites that's given suppliers an online platform to trade undetected. But others operate openly, leaving their numbers on the clear web and message thread sites like Reddit. Posing as a buyer, we spoke to one of them, a fentanyl producer in China, where it's estimated 90% of the world's fentanyl and its precursor ingredients are made. It's a written exchange we've chosen to voice. I'm looking for fentanyl or something similar.
Fentanyl in stock. How many grams do you want to buy for the first time?
How much for 5 grams?
Of course, $300.
Is this in US dollars?
Perfect. Yeah, US dollars.
How often do you import to New Zealand?
We send orders to New Zealand almost every month. They're usually long-term customers ordering several kilograms every month.
Can you please send me a picture of that fentanyl with the date on it?
Of course.
And they did. A bowl of white powder labelled fentanyl, ready to be packaged up and posted for a fraction of the price of other drugs like cocaine. It was as easy as that, and according to the supplier, they send it to New Zealand often. While we spoke to a producer in China, American journalist Ben Westhoff actually visited 2 of them for his book Fentanyl Inc. He went undercover as a dealer, visiting one in Wuhan that traded openly and sold ingredients to make the synthetic opioid.
I determined that they were selling more fentanyl precursors than any other company in the world. They were doing so brazenly that they actually had their address right on their website. I saw the sales floor, which is filled with just hundreds of young salespeople.
How is it that they are able to operate under this sort of veil of legitimacy?
Some of these precursors actually do have other uses. And when the government bans those, then they'll start making what are known as precursors. Eventually it gets to the point where these chemicals are so common, they're used in so many household chemical products that you can't ban them anymore. Really, you don't have to have much chemical expertise at all to turn these fentanyl precursors into finished fentanyl.
Westhoff also went underground on the streets of Shanghai, visiting another producer making fentanyl substitutes and new variants known as fentanyl analogues.
I was really shocked by the volume of drugs. And so, like I said, there were these barrels of 1 kilo bags filled up. On these tables, there were these giant mounds of powder. It kind of looked like Scarface at the end when Tony Montana is snorting all this cocaine. It really only takes a tiny amount to get someone high. And so that spoke to this huge worldwide market for these chemicals.
Chemicals that are often slightly tweaked to evade the law, because in 2019, fentanyl and its analogues were actually made illegal in China.
It's a constant cat and mouse game between governments and drug producers, because once governments outlaw one type of analog, the drug producers will just shift to another kind. All these rogue chemists have to do is slightly alter the molecule, and then pow, you've got a new drug. Not only is it similar acting, but now it's legal.
They're pitched by suppliers as stronger and sometimes safer alternatives to fentanyl, and these newer synthetic opioids are flooding the online market too. Lengthy menus dominate the dark web, listing the Frankenstein-like drugs. There's names like metonitazine, protonitazine, and etonitazepine. Just like fentanyl, some have already been detected on our shores, and they're just as easy to get from another supplier we spoke to on the dark web. I'm just wanting to know, is etonitazepine, is it like fentanyl?
It's an opioid if it helps.
Okay, how much for 5 grams of that?
$200 US, and that includes shipping.
Can you tell me how often it is that you import to New Zealand?
Always.
Right now, it really is a never-ending game of drug whack-a-mole.
That's, to me, why you have to address drug problems in your home country, because you're never going to be able to stop people from making this stuff. Unfortunately, I think it is only a matter of time before fentanyl becomes a serious problem in New Zealand.
I think that we need to assume that it very much could happen.
Because unfortunately, counterfeit drugs are nothing new.
A couple of summers ago, we saw our MDMA supply. Within the space of 2 months, 50% of it was adulterated with a synthetic cathinone called Eutalone. Now, that turned up at every festival that summer. So, had that have been fentanyl, you might see fatalities happen very, very quickly if we don't have the right measures in place.
Is it inevitable that we're going to see more of it?
We do have risk. We've had a few notifications this year, so 2 nitazines, which are more powerful than fentanyl even, and we've had the fentanyl incident as well.
And that's where the Drug Foundation's Sarah Helm says opioid reversal medicine naloxone comes in.
So this is naloxone. This is the nasal spray, which I'll show you afterwards. It's very easy to use. And these are the ampules. This is them out of the box here. And they just come as little vials.
Naloxone is quite literally the elixir of life, reversing the effects of an opioid overdose in just a matter of minutes. It was also the difference between life and death for the 13 people who overdosed on fentanyl in Wairarapa. But despite its life-saving properties, there's been a lot of red tape to get it. It was only recently that the Drug Foundation and organisations like the New Zealand Needle Exchange were able to start distributing the injectable ampule version without a prescription. The nasal spray, which is available over the counter, is a whopping $92 for a box of 2. And there isn't enough of it.
And we're waiting on a decision from Pharmac around funding the nasal spray version of naloxone, and we are hoping that that gets funded, because the ampules are good, but they are very hard to use, especially for a layperson. We want to equip the fire service, police, all ambulances, mates, mums of people who use drugs with naloxone nasal spray, especially in an outbreak, right? I want our Paikakariki Volunteer Fire Brigade to have, the nasal spray available to them, so that they don't have to have their hands tied and have nothing that they can do to save that person.
So right now it's just ambulance and police that have it? No?
No,
just
some
ambulance?
Some ambulances with sufficiently trained staff have naloxone on board.
Wow, so not even police either?
No.
Wow. And in that case of the Wairarapa overdoses?
There were a range of a dozen cases, and at least one of the cases the fire service were there first, that's right. Yeah.
And they don't have it on them?
They don't have it on them, and the police don't have it on them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would you like to see every emergency service in the country equipped with that?
Look, I think over time, yes. It's extraordinary that nobody passed away. We are so incredibly lucky, and I want those overdoses not to have been experienced without us taking any action as a result. So we've done what we can, we're doing what we can. We're asking for government to do a bit more because otherwise we could see mass fatalities, and we cannot just sit back and wait for that to happen.
New Zealand's overdose deaths have already increased by 54% over the past 5 years. And with the arrival of fentanyl and even stronger synthetic opioids like it, Sarah Helm believes our small nation is vulnerable.
We've asked for some very specific things like increased access to that opioid overdose naloxone reversal med, and we're also asking for an overdose prevention centre in inner city Auckland in particular also. Look, we've been saying that New Zealand's grossly underprepared for a sort of fentanyl style, North America style outbreak.
"25-year-old Blake is a testament to just how vital naloxone is.
So how many times would you say you've had to use or have had received naloxone?
Twice. Yeah, twice in my life.
So 2 potentially life-saving moments?
Yes.
Blake was smoking weed at 17 and using psychedelics not long after. By 21, he was hooked on home-bake heroin and opioids and was given addiction treatment medication Suboxone.
At that point, never wanted to give it up. I couldn't go to, say, the supermarket without using beforehand. And when I was, it took away all the fear, the social anxiety wasn't there. I felt like I was on top of the world.
Until one day, he wasn't.
I had just gone through a relationship breakup, and I was in that moment where I couldn't see a way forward in life, and I decided that overdosing myself would be a great way to end everything. And as soon as I had shot up what I had, the instant regret, everything I knew about what overdose looked like came flooding in. And I was lucky enough that when I had gone on Suboxone, AOTS would not give me my Suboxone until I took naloxone with me in an emergency ampules, syringe and needles to go with it.
Blake's breathing started to slow and he knew he was facing cardiac arrest.
I just remembered all the horror stories I'd heard about people not being able to breathe, their lungs filling with fluid and still being entirely conscious the entire time they're dying. And it terrified me. I didn't want to die that way. So that was what, after I had attempted to overdose, that was the thought, I don't want to die this way.
And what was it like? How long did it take the naloxone to kick in and for you to start to feel at your normal again?
It's about, I think for me, the relief was almost instantaneous because I knew that I had done something that was going to save me. I think physiologically, 2 to 3 minutes. I may not necessarily have actually needed it at the time, but it was something that if I didn't have it, and I did, I may still not be sitting here today.
Do you know others who have been through something similar? It's been a matter of life or death and this has saved them as well?
A couple of people. One person I am still quite close with and is still using. In the last 6 months, I believe, has had to have used it about 8 times. And each time it has saved their life.
It's valuable, but naloxone isn't our only line of defence. It's also become possible to catch dangerous drugs before we take them. New Zealand now has an early warning system, and drug testing was legalised in 2020. Efforts that were ramped up after the fentanyl overdoses in Wairarapa.
I don't think we're likely to see the level of substitution that they're seeing in other countries. We have a very different culture here, but we are part of the global culture now, and it is going to happen. My worry is that people will write it off as not of concern, and then it will happen, and it will happen to a bunch of people all at once. I'm worried about that. If I had kids that were going to festivals, I'd be worried about that. In fact, anybody who uses drugs should keep this in their mind.
Wendy Allison founded drug testing agency Know Your Stuff in 2014. We showed her the menu of drugs sent to us on the dark web.
So this list says to me that cathinones, synthetic opioids and benzodiazepines seem to be the things that this person is showing you. And those are the things that we have been finding. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. And I mean, that looks like a list that I should be handing out to the teams and going, look for these.
Teams made up of hundreds of Know Your Stuff volunteers across the country, mostly stationed at festivals and pop-up testing sites. They do fantastic work, but like our naloxone stocks, the spectrometers they use to test substances are limited.
We currently have approximately 5 spectrometers, and I say approximately 5 because we have one in transit that may or may not arrive in time for New Year. There are several more on order, but they also haven't arrived. So we're essentially going into summer in the same position we went into last summer with no more gear.
Just 5 spectrometers to service the entire country, not just by Know Your Stuff, but 2 other organisations as well. And while resourcing might be an issue, so too is stigma.
Do you think that there's still a bit of reluctance from some people to get their drugs tested?
Yes, there are definitely people who still, even after 7 years, think that it's a trap and we're suddenly going to whip out our badges and arrest them, and this is just not the case.
So why is it now legal to test illegal drugs, but it's still illegal to take them?
In the long term, legalisation and regulation, it seems to me to be a safer option.
Absolutely. We should have done it 10 years ago when the Law Commission actually recommended that we get rid of the Misuse of Drugs Act and replace it with an act administered by the Ministry of Health. We didn't do that. And in that 10 years, what we have seen is this substitution issue grow and grow and grow. And now we've got fentanyl arriving in the country. And so it's become a life and death situation. And this whole situation exists because of prohibition. It's chemists trying to get around prohibited drugs by making drugs that aren't prohibited. And then those get prohibited, so they make stronger ones. And this is entirely because drugs are illegal. If drugs were not illegal and if they were regulated properly, a great deal of the harm that we attribute to drugs, which is actually caused by drug prohibition, would just disappear.
Would a change in law and an introduction of regulation, could that potentially save lives?
I don't think it's a case of potentially, it will save lives.
It's pretty clear that the drugs are winning the war if there is a war.
Why is that?
Well, it's because you can make as many laws as you like, but the laws that you can't change are the laws of economics, supply and demand. The drug market is driven by demand, and trying to reduce the supply doesn't make the problem go away.
In a way, Matt Bowden tried to legalise and regulate the drug market. A rock musician, activist and the self-titled godfather of legal highs, Bowden introduced party pills to New Zealand after losing a family member to ecstasy.
And so I said, well, what about if we were to create some safer drug alternatives which are non-addictive, which are not going to kill people, and so that people can go through that stage of their life where they're partying without dying.
That drug was BZP, and once upon a time you could legally buy a pack from your local dairy.
We developed pills as an alternative to meth. New Zealand has consumed about 26 million pills on 10.5 million occasions, 400,000 consumers over 8.5 years. There were 0 deaths and 0 lasting injuries.
Bowden says the offering was a safer alternative to illicit drugs, and at that point, more popular than most of them too. But in 2008, our government banned party pills, and another high rose from its ashes: synthetic cannabinoids.
We went to government and said, let's do the same safety testing as we do with medicines. The idea is that if there's going to be a drug on the market, let's make sure that it meets the safety standard.
In 2013, the world-leading Psychoactive Substances Act was introduced, and legal highs could be licensed, regulated, and proved safe before sold. But by then, Bowden had already bowed out of the industry, and around a year later, synthetic cannabinoids were also banned. Production was then driven underground, and the deaths of more than 70 New Zealanders were connected to the black market versions.
A lot of the drugs people are taking have been designed by accident or are polluted because there's no quality control. We know that if we give people a safer alternative, we make it available in the market will trend that way. We've proven that before, so we know it'll work again.
But what would be the best option? Would it be to legalise and regulate drugs as they are, so marijuana, cocaine, MDMA, or would it be to create a legal synthetic high like what you created with the party pills?
So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually getting involved with a startup right now which is developing newer, safer alternatives to existing drugs. Not so much just for people to get high, but really for processing trauma. Things like psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, ketamine.
It's a synthetic solution to a synthetic drug problem. And now, after abdicating, the former king of legal highs could soon return to the throne. But unlike the party pill era of the early 2000s, this time Matt Bowden says he's focused on health over recreation.
What we saw in the party pill era was people going into a food store and buying pills and not getting any advice. It needs to be a bit more like a pharmacy, where the person that's behind the counter between the consumer and the drugs has got a qualification in an area of alcohol and drug clinical assessment. We trialled this in New Zealand and we found it really effective with a group of 1,000 people who came into a relationship with essentially like a drug counsellor, a clinician who was able to say, yes, you can have this, and hey, why don't we ever talk about your usage this week? That's the way forward, I think, and that's what I'd like to start implementing straight away.
Would we ever see a new party pill era?
I think if we explore the technology, I think we can find a way to create drugs which are safe enough for people to use in a social context, and I think it's important that we do that.
And the tools are there. The Psychoactive Substances Act still exists, but sits idle with no approved products or applications. It's a missed opportunity, Bowden says, could keep people safe from deadly substances like fentanyl.
We need to regulate it and make it safe rather than making it taboo. The only country in the world which has legislation set up for the rapid development and deployment of psychoactive drugs is New Zealand. And so I believe that the onus is on us to do this work and to lead the world in this area.